Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to be making a simple 3D printed fossil stand for these little ripple patterns here. And we'll be doing it in Tinkercad. Hopefully it'll be a good tutorial for people who don't really understand how to use Tinkercad yet. So our first step, we're going to take the fossil and we're going to measure it. I think I'd like to display it with this side down, kind of like this. So we'll take a measurement here. I want the stand to be completely behind the stone. So right here we're talking about 5.5 centimeters. And in height, we'll go with 6.5 centimeters. The thickness, at its thickest point on the bottom, is just under 2 centimeters. Okay, so let's move to Tinkercad. Okay, so we've opened Tinkercad and started a new 3D object. The first thing we're going to do is retitle it to something relevant to our fossil. And I'm going to do this a little strangely. It might not be very intuitive for you, but you'll see where we're going eventually. On the bottom, if you remember right, we measured 5.5 centimeters. This is in millimeters, so we'll go 55. The thickness was already about 2 centimeters, so we're good there. To change the height, we click this vertical vertices, and then we can type in our height of 65 millimeters or 6.5 centimeters. And so what we have here is we have a whole square in the shape, roughly at least, of our fossil. So the next thing I'm going to do is imagine the holder that I showed at the beginning of this video here. And that shows you where I want to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to change the angle a bit so we can make this top vertices show up on the bottom. I'm going to take off about 2 millimeters, so we'll go 63. And then I'm going to make it a lot longer. And so imagine that this is just this window where we can see the fossil in the stand. There's nothing actually there. This is just empty space, and this is making sure that nothing ever enters that empty space. We use our left key on the mouse, click and drag, and highlight so both of the objects are selected. And then we click this button up here, which is group, or we can press Control-G on our keyboard. So now you can see we have this new hole. I'm going to do one other thing here. I'm going to make this again 55 wide. And this is just going to be for the nameplate. So if you look here, we're not quite centered with our whole object. So we select both of them, click this button to align them, or press L on our keyboard. And that's all the alignment I want to do. So look here, we can select our object, move it here. Now it's lined here. Our snap grid is set to 1 millimeter. So if we're using our arrows on our keyboard, we can move it 1 millimeter with each press. We can change this interval to be whatever we want here. Off is some distance below 0.1. I like 1 though. So I want this to be, we'll go with 2 millimeters. And I actually want this to go lower. So we can just drag this down infinitely because there's not going to be anything there. And what this is our little latch that's going to hold the fossil piece, which again is imaginary in this square here. Highlight both objects again. And now we have this really odd shaped hole. But remember, the only important part is actually here and here. So we take a new square. This is a solid object. We're going to make it 55 wide again. And again, center it by highlighting both, pressing the Align button, and centering them. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'd like the fossil to be tilted backwards a little. So to change the angle, we have this arrow here. If I can get it to work, there it goes. So we can click it, and we can drag it in either of these two circles. See, this inner circle, which is highlighted blue and red here, is a snap circle to go to common angles you might want to rotate to. I just want to rotate back 10 degrees, so we could do it in this upper circle here. Or if you don't want to fiddle with that, you can just click on the amount of degrees here, type in the angle. Oops, it went backwards, so we'll go -10. And that's what I wanted. I want to drag this up so that this corner is just 2 millimeters above the bottom of this surface. So right now, that's about perfectly at the bottom. And you can see this is how much we just moved it by dragging on this arrow. I want to go 2 higher, so we'll say -32. Oops, I'm sorry. -28. That's about right. So we click here. By the way, whenever I'm moving this way and moving the whole image plane, you do that by pressing the scroll wheel on your mouse and dragging. So now we're going to drag this forward a little. Just do it so it's all the way into the hole here. Now I'm going to use this vertices to drag this upwards. And I'm going to make this just a little thicker. Well, what did I do there? 38. There we go. Give it a nice flat top. And that's about what I want for a fossil stand. So select both objects, combine. Again, this button here for combine group. And that's a good fossil stand. But now let's say that I wanted a little nameplate here, or something that I could slide a piece of paper into. We're going to take our box again, our solid box. Let's call it 3 millimeters. I'm going to drop it down a bit. So I'd like our piece of paper to be about 5 millimeters. So we're going to call this 6 millimeters. And we're only going to make it 1 millimeter thick. And again, our complete width is always 55. Recenter it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to a hole by clicking here after we selected the object. I'm going to duplicate it again here. Hit 6. I'm going to have a 1 millimeter lip on each side. So actually, let's change this to 7. And then we'll take our duplicate and we'll change it to 5. So it's actually going to be a 7 millimeter lip, or a 7 millimeter piece of paper. And we can make this as wide as we want. Whoops. Okay, for some reason it was selecting this object even though I wasn't highlighting it. That's just, I'm guessing, a bug in Tinkercad, unless I didn't understand what I was doing there. We can just drag over these two. I'd like to center them, put them on the back wall, and center it vertically. So there we go. That's the slot we're going to cut into this piece here. Oops. Okay, I see. The corner just barely covered it, and that's what got this back object. Make sure to only get these two in there. Group them. And there's our new hole. If you remember right, we were tilted this way 10 degrees. So -10. Okay, so this is a weird angle, and trying to drag it to the left sometimes doesn't work. So just choose a different angle. Make sure you're centered. I'm going to lift this just up a little bit. I'm going to turn Snap Grid off because it's not helping me right now. This will just let you move it with a little bit more fine control now. So I'd like to get this more or less centered on this post. We're going to click it now. Hold the left arrow just to move it in. I'm going to get it lined up right there. I'm going to change my Snap Grid back to 1. Okay, that's too far. So I'm going to change it back to a 1/2. And that's where we'll put the little paper slot. So now combine them, or group. And there's a little slot for a paper label to go in. To export this file, make sure it's highlighted. Click Export and select STL. Okay, so we have our fossil stand imported in Cura. And I just want to give you a quick note on how to do this. If it's sitting this way, it's not actually going to print great. And I'll show you why here in the preview. So our layer lines are going this way. They're a bit hard to see. Let's change it to low quality to make it more obvious. Alright, so we can see our layer lines are going this way in the stand. And if you imagine the fossil sitting here, there's going to be a force pushing back on this wall, pushing this way. And anytime a 3D print breaks, it's almost always going to be on these print lines. So the top half of this might just snap back and let your fossil fall. With light fossils, it's probably not going to be an issue. The other thing is with this, the label holder, there's no support for this part, so that would fail. So what we want to do is we want to rotate it that way. And so now the layer lines are this way, and when a force is pushing this way on the stand, it's probably not going to break because there's no torque going across each side of the layer lines. If that makes sense, hopefully it does. But we can print this now, and we should have a nice working fossil stand. Another thing is for light fossil stands, you don't actually need much infill, so I'm only doing 10% lightning infill and 3 walls. You don't actually need that much for a very light fossil. For more, you might want to go to like a gyroid infill or a cubic infill and a higher percentage. But for this one, lightning's plenty fine. And that's only a 17-gram print. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.